All right, South Africa's unemployment rate has tipped over the 25% level again. In the first quarter of this year, 25.2% of the economically active population was unemployed. According to Stats SA, which released its figures this morning, this is up from 24.9% on the previous quarter. Both the informal and formal sectors saw job losses. However, employment increased in the agriculture and domestic sectors. 44,000 jobs were created, but this has been balanced out by 100,000 job losses. For the latest on the labour sector, we're now joined by Chris Hart, economist at Investment Solutions. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
What does this mean, job losses?
Well, basically, on a net basis, there were 44,000 jobs created. So 144,000 created and 100,000 lost. The formal sector lost the most there. And what was interesting is agriculture creating the most. So it probably was a seasonal factor, being the harvesting season or whatever. But certainly after the big wage increases that we saw towards the end of, during the quarter, I think you'll see job losses coming through in that sector. We're going back to strike season, etc. Basically, this economy, whether you're talking about 10,000, 100,000, whatever, it's almost irrelevant when you put it against the context of the millions that still need jobs. Okay, a lot of people are not included in the unemployed because they are discouraged job seekers, for instance. And I think the numbers is something like almost 2.5 million discouraged job seekers, and then there's some people that are just not in the economically active workforce, although there could be. So if you look at the actual participation rate, you could almost see that more than half of the potential is actually not working, and only but we out of a population of over 50 million, we've got about 13.6 million people working. This economy is not geared to create jobs. The household savings rate is negative, which means that the household resources which are needed to fund small businesses is not really there. And that's a critical connection that needs to be made. You need savings in the household, and you need the jobs created on on the scale that we need through small business. It's the only known way to actually do it. Small business, and the only known way to fund it is through household resources, and that's both are lacking. This is quite a hostile environment for small businesses, really, because of the structure of the economy, the dominance of large business, and the regulatory regime which requires economies of scale to actually implement. And that's a substantial problem that we need to actually overcome.
Okay, but we see still 100,000 job losses. It's still a large figure in terms of the actual people. That's 100,000 people who lost their jobs. What does that mean for the economy in terms of us actually growing at all?
Well, basically, those who've got jobs are getting quite good salary increases, and that's because of union activity. But the consequence of that, when you're not producing the value to actually pay for it, is that you do get job losses, and that's what's happening certainly in the formal sector. And so we need to actually look at productivity as an additional factor, because productivity also helps to generate investment into an economy. Lack of productivity gains actually is something that also deflects investment, and that's what we need to work on in South Africa.
Now, the National Development Plan released in 2012, there was quite an ambitious target there. Government wants to create 11 million more jobs by 2030.
Yes.
Can that happen now?
Yes, it can, but not with the current policies. We once got to connect the dots. You can't eat seeds and expect harvests, for instance. So SARS needs to start rethinking the way it actually taxes us. It cannot tax capital formation because we are capital deficient with an enormous amount of unemployment. So we need to sort that out. We need to actually restructure regulations so that it's appropriate for small businesses, that you don't need economies of scale to run, and you need to actually look at that regulatory onion to try and see if you can actually discard some of the layers and layers that are added. It's not just a single bit of regulation, it's actually the layers and layers that the cumulative effect of what's done. So we need to look at that. If we don't look at that, we will never ever create the jobs. We'll still sit with 13 to 14 million jobs, in 5-6 years' time, if that's the, if we don't actually do it. The National Development Plan, I think, is a fairly good one. So if we adopt it, but I don't see signs of that coordinated adoption, across ministries. We've got industries that are in distress, agriculture is in distress, mining is in distress, and yet you've got policies coming out that's going to hit them even harder. And potential areas like beneficiation also going to be hit hard with carbon taxes and that kind of thing. It doesn't make sense. We need to pull in the same direction.
Okay, just one last question very quickly. The 2011 budget, we saw a 9 billion rand job fund set aside by government to create more jobs over the next 3 years, and that would include 2013.
Yes.
Why hasn't that helped?
Well, it won't help because here you've got a top-down approach where you're hoping that there'll be trickle down. You don't get much trickle at the bottom area when you have that approach. That's why it's so important to embed savings in the household so that people can, when they see opportunities, have got the resources immediately to access. Half the problem with the job funds, etc., it's an exercise in red tape, etc., expensive administration, etc., and it's actually not that easy to actually access.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for your time and joining us. That was Chris Hart, economist from Investment Solutions.
News that moves. eNCA.com.